So good morning. My name is Rick Casale, and I'm a trustee of Carbon Copy, and I'll be your host for this online event. Welcome to my guest speakers. I'll introduce you to them shortly. And welcome to you, our audience. Thank you for completing the poll that you did when you joined us. And thank you for your time this morning. Really looking forward to the discussion we're about to have. This is the first event of our series, and we are focusing on how do we speed up collaborative local climate action. A few quick housekeeping details before we get started. This session is being recorded, and we'll email you a link to the recording after the event. Microphones are muted and cameras turned off, except for our guest speakers. After my introduction, we will jump straight into a panel discussion, followed by your questions. And if you could please, if you look on your right-hand side in the margin, there is a Q&A tab, and there's also a chat tab. Please do type in your questions and don't hold back. Sooner rather than later would be good. It gives us time to collate them. And we hope to get through as many questions as possible during the second half, but please do start asking your questions and let us know if they are aimed at one particular person or the entire panel. And so let me just get started by saying a few opening remarks before I introduce the guest speakers. So this is an event series about inspiration and action. It's about where you can put your energy next as we look for a different way forward in our social and economic recovery from COVID. And crucially, it's about what kind of collective local action we can take to address the immediate climate crisis. Almost everything must change if we are to achieve an inclusive carbon zero future. It's been hard for people to conceptualize such a transformation until now. The level of change and disruption caused by the pandemic has made the idea of big changes much more real, and the idea of big positive action something that's within our grasp. Build Back Better is an alternative path to business as usual that could achieve a more just, regenerative, and sustainable recovery. It's based on the fundamental truth that our recovery is inextricably linked with taking action on the environmental emergency and on climate justice. But we don't simply want to just talk about the concept and the promise of building back better. We want to discuss tangible ways that we can take collective action locally. 85% of people in the UK are worried about climate change. 73% say that Britain is already feeling its effects. 67% of local councils have already declared a climate emergency. A lot of great work on local climate action is already taking place. Given the urgency of the climate crisis, it's important that we learn quickly from this experience and we copy this leadership. And so on that note, I would like to introduce you to our guest speakers. And I'm going to read out their mini bios so that I get it right. First is Cara Jenkinson. She is Cities Manager at Ashen. She is part of the Ashen Livable Cities team, which works with UK towns and cities to help them realise their sustainability ambitions. Ashen runs a network of city region sustainability officers and has published a Climate Action Co-Benefits Toolkit for local authorities, which was co-authored by Cara, as well as 31 climate actions for councils, which was published in partnership with Friends of the Earth. Cara is also director of a community energy group. Welcome, Cara.
Thank you.
Rakesh Prashara is membership secretary of Greens of Colour. He started out volunteering with Greenpeace and coordinating the Newcastle Greenpeace group. As local campaigns against fossil fuels exploration became more prominent, he became actively involved in this community issue and moved on from his Greenpeace role. He's currently the deputy chair and membership secretary for the Green Party's BAME group, Greens of Colour. Welcome, Rakesh.
Thank you.
Chris Church wears several hats, including co-director of Community Environment Associates. He's an experienced advisor on sustainable and community development, specializing in work at the local and community level and on links to the national policy agenda. He has worked on environmental issues for over 30 years as a volunteer activist, an NGO manager, a consultant, and a trustee of UK and international bodies. Chris has chaired the UK Low Carbon Communities Network, the London 21 Sustainability Network, and led work to set up Community Energy England. Not least, he's a parish councillor for North Hinksey, which is an area immediately west of Oxford. Welcome, Chris. And last but not least, Jake Woodier is an experienced campaigner and organizer. He currently works as the COP26 campaign manager for the Climate Coalition, which is the largest group of organizations in the UK dedicated to tackling climate change. Jake has been active in grassroots movements and organizing for the best part of a decade, and most recently with the UK Student Climate Network, where he helped coordinate the UK Youth Strike movement and co-organized the Global Climate Strike in September of last year. Jake also has responsibility in the volunteer coordinating role with Green New Deal UK, is a writer and an editor of a politics and culture magazine. Welcome, Jake.
Thank you.
And if we can now just go straight into some questions, and if I may start with you, Jake. We're focused on Build Back Better. It's something that is taking hold and a lot of people are talking about. I also noticed that Green New Deal UK has also recently launched a Build Back Better campaign. So from your perspective, can you give us an idea of what Build Back Better means for you?
Yeah, I think that it's such a huge and kind of momentous thing, the concept of building back better, that it's really difficult to kind of describe too specifically what exactly it is. But I think that we can work within a framework that really helps to kind of dictate the direction in which we want to go. I think that that centers around new ways of working, kind of in our politics, in our economy, and these are based on fairness and based on providing for people rather than purely focusing on GDP and growth. So what that actually kind of means in practice is wide-scale investment in public services, where we think about what we provide to people as a good and a necessary thing, and we're not quibbling over sort of small amounts of money in the grand scheme of things to provide the basic necessities for people. Really starting to try and develop this concept of what a lot of people are now talking about as public luxury, where everyone's needs are met, and then we create a more equal and fair society on the whole. And at the heart of that, we also need to be embedding sustainability right at the very center and core of the economy. And you referenced earlier the kind of the larger role that the state has been able to play recently, and the imagination of what people actually believe the government and the state can do. And I think that that needs to be harnessed towards all of these public goods and sustainability, whilst at the same time doing our best to not just reduce, but also eliminate those inequalities within society that have been entrenched over decades and decades and centuries, in fact. So we need to rebalance those inequalities that are structural at the core, so that the concept of equality runs throughout our economy. And what that kind of means is not just at home, it means internationally as well, and being open and collaborative on the world scene. And that means working with other nations with an overarching aim of ending these injustices and power inequalities rather than causing or entrenching them.
Rakesh, I just want to pick up on the point that Jake is making around inequalities and ask you the same kind of question about what would you wish to see in terms of not returning back to business as usual, but instead building back better?
I think, I mean, we've all come to value health workers, teachers, carers, and emergency workers over this crisis. I think Build Back Better is about transforming the economy and society so that these crucial workers are paid fairly. It's also about equality in our society, where people where people are treated fairly. There's fair opportunities, and especially people from working class backgrounds are given an opportunity for new green jobs.
One of the things that I think we've all seen during this current pandemic is people in their local communities coming together and looking out for each other a lot more, really getting to know your neighbors as opposed to they're just people that happen to live next door to you. Do you think, Rakesh, that this is a catalyst potentially for building more lasting community resilience?
Yes, of course. I mean, we have seen that communities have come together to care for their neighbours when we all thought that we were all individuals. There's thousands of mutual aid groups around the country, and as the immediate threat of coronavirus dies away, it's important that we reach out to those people and give them our vision of this Build Back Better, so that they can carry on organising the way they have started with, because Build Back Better is about community, and we need to get this right now.
Chris, I think Rakesh is absolutely right in terms of it's all about building community, and building community resilience is very place-based and intensely local. And so this is perhaps a hard question to answer, but to what extent do you see the coronavirus crisis being a catalyst for further decentralization?
Well, I would love to think that was the case. My worry is that we are still on something of a knife edge. We've heard Jake very clearly set out the positive view of what Build Back Better looks like. But we should recognise there's an awful lot of people out there who, in short, want to tear up the rule book, remove the environmental regulation, strip down the planning regulations and so on, with the idea of getting people back to work and getting the economy going. And we have to make sure that our vision, longer term though it may be, of fairness and justice and sustainability, really works for all the people in every part of our community, so that we really can have very clear plans. We know we've got, in many areas, stronger communities because of all the mutual aid, all the coming together. I think there's a lot to build on there, but we really need to have a fairly clear vision that we can really communicate to people that doesn't sound, too long-winded. We need to be clear and direct about what we want to see in the next 6 months and the next 2 years and the next 10 years.
Certainly at a national level, the talk is of leveling up prosperity, and typically we hear it in terms of geographies. We hear it in terms of regions, the northern powerhouse, maybe city regions. And yet I wonder, do you think it should be more specific, aimed more towards communities and neighborhoods? And for example, just referencing Oxford, given that you are a local parish councillor there, Oxford is obviously a very prosperous city in the southeast, and yet it still has one of the greatest disparities in the country in terms of education and income levels.
Yeah, I mean, tackling inequality locally as well as nationally, is going to be central to this, and that's got to be built into Build Back Better right from the start. I'm sure we all agree on that. The challenge is, how do we do that, and how do we really actually show we're doing it? The problem with tackling inequality is that it's not always blindingly obvious what's going on to people. We're seeing a focus on short-term stuff like transport. We need to really make sure that our local authorities are actually listening at a point when many of those local authorities are in very serious financial trouble and maybe looking to take all the shortcuts they can. But inequality really plays out on the streets where people live, and that's where Build Back Better needs to make a change, as well as doing all the big national stuff.
Yes, and just before I move on to Cara, in terms of the big national stuff, how do we ensure, or at least direct, some of the national stimulus packages and the programs that are being talked about, so that they build on established local climate action plans rather than simply wash them away? Sorry, that was to you, Chris. Just as a final.
Oh, sorry. I thought you were moving on. Sorry.
So it's really a question.
I think. Well. Sorry.
Sorry, just to repeat the question, is that how do we ensure that some of the local climate action plans and all the great initiative that's already happening doesn't simply just get washed away with national stimulus packages that may not be well connected?
I think that's a question that every community needs to consider. I think we have to show people very clearly that one size does not fit all in terms of recovery plans. National can provide the overall stimulus, the overall vision, if you like, but I think we need to start with what needs to change in our communities, and we need to be very clear about how our existing local climate action plans may need to change, not to back off delivering zero carbon as fast as possible, but to really make sure that the inequalities and all the suffering caused by COVID, we find ways to build those in. And I think the way we do that really is by trying to understand the problems that our communities are facing, and not start with some kind of long-term, top-down, very climate-focused and very inequalities-focused plan, but really making sure that we link that right down to what our neighbourhoods need.
So, Cara, if I may turn to you as we focus on this really important local level. I know that Ashen has very recently, within the last couple of weeks, convened a number of councils to discuss their plans and their progress on local climate action. I'm wondering, the councils that you convened, whether they think COVID has sped up or slowed down their climate action plans, and what are the insights that you can share from that gathering?
Yeah, we did some polling ourselves on the webinar held with CDP for local authorities, and we had over 100 participants from around 50 to 60 local authorities. And we asked about climate action plans and what effect they thought coronavirus would have on that. And we expected the majority to say that it would slow them down. And it was a majority, but 33% actually thought it would speed them up, which was actually quite interesting. And I think that the next question maybe that we asked them shone some light on that, which was, what impact did the councils think there had been on residents' concern about climate change? Were they more concerned or less concerned? And a majority, quite a considerable majority, thought their residents were more concerned, and that is backed up by national polling as well. So I think councils are going to feel a pressure from residents to follow through on promises that they've made in their climate emergency declarations. And then we also asked them about whether they were actively planning a green recovery. And again, a majority of councils said that they were. So that's all, I think, very encouraging, although I would absolutely echo the concern that Chris has raised with funding. And there is no question that councils are incredibly strapped for cash right now just to do their basic statutory work around social care and other obligations. So this will be really challenging for them to deliver. And that's why the whole partnership with businesses, with community groups, universities in the area, all of that's going to be so important to deliver on their ambitions.
I think, building on your point, necessarily we need to be very local and community focused in terms of implementation. What are some of your thoughts, Cara, around how we can avoid things becoming fragmented and ending up with something that's no greater than the sum of the parts?
Yeah. Well, I think that really comes down to sort of the core of what we're probably talking about today, which is how do we share experience and how do we make sure that we're all learning from best practice? So there's always kind of two sides to localization. You've got the kind of postcode lottery argument, but then you've also the scope for huge amounts of innovation. But that innovation really works if you can then spread it out so that people can very readily learn from best practice. If everyone just does what's invented locally, then that's going to limit how much can be done. So that's where organisations such as Ashen, Carbon Copy, all of us that are working to share good practice locally can really speed up the change and get more of a uniformity without losing the innovation that you get from giving some freedom from local areas to innovate.
Yeah. Rakesh, one of the things that we know about climate change is that it can deepen divisions because it disproportionately affects the vulnerable and the poor. And it can exacerbate injustice, racism, poverty. These are things that we know about, and hence the importance of climate justice, and that we can't tackle the climate crisis without also addressing climate justice. From your perspective, what should we be thinking about in terms of policies and our responses as we're looking forward?
Okay, so I think we all know that many BAME communities are vulnerable and poor around this country. They're living in fuel poverty, in homes that aren't insulated and are drafty. Climate justice for them is around retrofitting those homes and helping those people out of fuel poverty. And then there's also another issue where we can't expect these communities to get involved with the climate crisis until they're not being racially profiled anymore, and until they aren't fearful for their lives. Climate justice is also about addressing these issues so people can engage with the climate crisis without having to have all these other things that are stopping them from being engaged.
And Jake, building on Rakesh's point, and thinking about what we would do differently in Building Back Better, how are some of the ways that you've done to achieve more constructive dialogue between community groups and councils? I think I'd be interested if you shared some of your experiences on how you bring together not just the usual suspects, but the unusual suspects.
I think that when we're often talking about campaigning and organizing, a lot of the time in the climate space historically, we have tended to be kind of engrossed within this perception that we need to do everything incredibly fast. So that means that we usually just reach out to the people that we know are through our networks and obviously and apparently kind of very visibly interested, and put that out as an availability for being engaged in a sense. So we'll engage our local NGO groups, for instance, before actually talking to perhaps a local faith group or a local neighborhood group that focuses on a completely different issue. And I think that when we're talking about these ways of building back better, it means increasing the amount of dialogue that we have with people. And it kind of throws back, in a sense, to kind of old community organizing, where the basic principle is actually just talking to one another, in a sense, around common and shared issues. And what one person may think is a climate issue, another person may not do. But having safe streets and safe air for kids to walk to school is a climate issue. And it's about linking those different issues together and kind of creating, as you say, this whole that is able to demonstrate support for a whole wide range of different policies and different thematic areas in which to engage the council within. And then it's kind of involving the council and local decision makers. And it's often, I found that it's best placed, done in a neutral kind of arena where that helps to address the power imbalance that is inherently there when you're talking to people with decision-making powers, and really making the space work for everyone so that it's a comfortable environment for people to be within. And it doesn't, I guess what I'm trying to put forward is trying to make it as inviting as possible so that it removes as many barriers to access. And I think that rather than it being just a singular occurrence or a smattering of events, this kind of dialogue and engagement with councils works best when it's over the long term and it's sustained. And that helps to build up this relationship between the different parties as well. So rather than it kind of being an information giving exercise or feeling like you're being given information or told policy and plans are already developed, there's a meaningful relationship that's being built in which there's a reciprocal transfer of information, learning, and kind of developing those pathways to action and implementation that will be meaningful at the local level.
Chris, can I just pick up on Jake's point about a more meaningful and ongoing relationship and dialogue between community groups and councils? I'd love for you if you could maybe talk to a little bit the example, I think, of Fast Forward Oxford in terms of a different way that community groups can work with and influence their council.
Certainly. I think firstly we need to recognise that collaboration can be quite a challenge for small climate action groups who may be used to collaborating with other environmental groups, hopefully. Now we're having to collaborate with a wider social and voluntary sector, faith groups, all those people, but also to start collaborating with our local councils. In Oxford, we've had a couple of projects. One has been a formal collaboration between an environmental group and the City Council to tackle air pollution around schools. When we signed that agreement to cooperate, to share logos and so on, we made it very clear that we weren't going to necessarily endorse everything the council did. We reserve the right to kick them on the ankles now and then, and occasionally that has been necessary. So I think we have to be careful to make sure that collaboration works both ways, and it's not just us endorsing people. I'm sorry, I'm getting a bit of an echo. Oxford, the Fast Forward Oxford project was a real attempt to do that. I've got a couple of slides which Nina may be able to put up. We decided we needed to really share a positive vision for what a decarbonised Oxford might look like. And we therefore said, okay, what will Oxford look like in 2040? I don't know if people are seeing that. Can we move to the next slide? And the one after. Yeah, the idea of Fast Forward Oxford was really to say we need to be clear about where we want to go, and we need to get there very fast. The climate crisis is like an avalanche rolling towards us. The COVID crisis was an earthquake, but the avalanche coming is just as serious, if not potentially more so. So we started out with a vision, which we told through 6 stories of local people's lives around food, energy, work, transport, housing, what life might be like in 2040 if we are well on the way to zero carbon. But with that, we needed the policies that need to be enacted now. And I think one of the biggest challenges for local groups is really sit down and think, okay, what do these policies actually look like? What are the ones that we want? We're quite used to responding and criticising existing policies that local councils are putting up. I think it's really valuable for groups to step back and say, okay, we want a transport system that is going to deliver zero carbon, good public health, and ideally our vision is that a transport system for a city should mean that no one needs to use a private car. That's a big ask, but it's certainly achievable by 2040. So we set out the policies, we highlighted the good practice, and then we got a printed copy of that into the hands of every councillor, district, city and county, and really said, look, we want to have a dialogue with you on this. Some of this you may not be ready for, but these are the things that you're going to have to deal with over the next 5 years. We know that, we have a fortunate, I think, that all our political parties almost are endorsing the move to net zero. The arguments we're having over how fast. And I think the role of local action must be to push our councils to be as ambitious as possible. And that may mean challenging them just as much as it means collaborating with them.
And I think, Chris, that's a really interesting point to make in terms of the dual role that community groups play, both in support of their councils to enable the climate action plans to be implemented, but also pushing them harder when doing the best we can is just not enough. And that's just a challenge, let's say, that community groups have to manage, and equally something that the councils have to be comfortable with in terms of the support and also the pushback from the community groups.
If I could just finish on that, I think local groups have been really good at doing 3 things: protests, policy work, and actually projects. We have a role to play in creating a local green infrastructure, whether it's around cycling, local food, retrofitting homes and so on. But we're small groups. By and large, we can only do that at a pilot level. We need to do the policy work to engage with the councils, but we shouldn't forget that we also have a critical role in protesting when central or local government or private sector or anyone else. And I think it's how we combine protest policies and projects that can make local action really successful.
Absolutely. Rakesh, on that point of, the lots of different angles that community groups can play, how do we bring the BAME communities along in this coalition building centered on local climate action?
I think we need to start looking at things from their perspective rather than from our perspective. We need to start campaigning for the things to improve their lives because those are the things that are their barriers before they can start supporting climate action. So I mean, the COVID crisis has shown us how unequal our society is. We need to start. Like I say, we need to start supporting their demands for equality, so that we can bring them along and show them that they are included in our vision. I've been involved in climate groups for the last 10 years, and what we've always done is talk down to people, telling them they should be involved. And why aren't you campaigning with us? This is so big. But they have so many other concerns before they can come to the table, and we need to start thinking about that.
Cara, one of the things that Ashton is working on is 31 climate actions for councils. And I think one of the things that struck me about this initiative, which is a fantastic one, is the notion of co-benefits and how we can get more people engaged and involved in climate action by making the connections with other benefits that are broader. Do you want to just talk a little bit about the 31 climate actions and this notion of co-benefits as a way of unlocking maybe more funds and engaging more people?
Yeah, sure. So the idea of the 31 actions was really to give a starting point for councils looking to put together their climate emergency action plans. It was a set of actions that we drew up with Friends of the Earth. And what we did was to try and quantify them in terms of carbon savings, cost to set up and run, and also loads of good case studies behind them too. But one of the things we included, as you say, Rick, was co-benefits and where those were. And those really are key now, even more than they were before the crisis. And as Rakesh says, I mean, the pandemic has absolutely exposed health inequalities across the country, and we know that acting on cold homes, acting on air pollution, those things are going to have huge health benefits. And therefore, I think if we can get policymakers thinking about those co-benefits, then we can use existing funding in a smarter way, so that we're targeting it on prevention, so that we create more health resilience in the population. So whether it's co-benefits around health, whether it's around jobs, whether it's about getting more community resilience, it's thinking about all of those climate actions in a way that really maximizes that. And that makes it easier to make the case with people that are concerned about job creation, concerned about better housing, concerned about better health. You can then make that case much more clearly. Absolutely.
One of the things that I know Ashton's working on is creating a local action coalition. You've got Friends of the Earth, Greenpeace, the London Councils, Adept, LEDNet. You've got a phenomenal lineup here to unify the asks of national government. What are some of those asks that you are going to put forward?
I think it's really about taking a place-based approach to the green recovery. So recognising, like I think everyone here has said, is that there are different issues depending on where you are. So the local authorities and local communities are best placed to decide how the green recovery is to be delivered, and there are powers and funding that local government needs in order to do that. And it may be things like planning powers. Looking at a recent report yesterday about these new garden cities, which are just going to put in more car travel, not less car travel. It's 7 miles to the local shop. This kind of thing, where local authorities need to have more power so that they can prevent that kind of thing happening. So it's really it's also around the skills agenda, because local authorities working with their local enterprise partnerships, they know what the skills situation is. They know their industries that are at risk. To the point of if jobs are going to be lost in aviation, as we know they will be in certain fossil fuel industries. We need retraining. We need to work out where the training needs are, and local authorities can work, whether it's with their local trade unions, whether it's with local enterprise partnerships, to work out what the best strategies are for those areas. So really, the national asks is about empowering local government to do what it is very well placed to do.
Thank you. I think before we turn it over a little bit to our audience and pick up on some of their questions, I just want to see what the results of the poll was. So what we asked the audience to do when they came in is just to share some of their thoughts, and you can see the answers in the right-hand side if you click on the polls tab. What are the top 3 points in terms of how can we improve collaboration between community groups, local councils and businesses? The first one was around access to funding for initiatives in the local communities. Second was matchmaking. organizations interested in similar initiatives. And then the third was around more training on climate change issues and collaborative solutions, and more toolkits and ways to measure impact. So clearly funding is an issue, but it's also interesting to see other things as well beyond simply funds that people need. Jake, any thoughts on that? Anything surprise you in that list or not surprise you in that list in terms of what people think they need to improve collaboration?
I mean, I think that it all makes a lot of sense. Some of the biggest barriers to being able to take that action are funding or even access to that funding. Getting access to funding is often a very difficult and complicated process for a lot of groups. And that's why NGOs and businesses often will have a fundraising specialist, because they understand how to navigate the complicated processes of getting that seed funding or continuation grants. So I think that councils maybe have a role to play in working with the foundation and trusts to kind of make these processes a lot simpler and have a very easy to access kind of pipeline for local groups and initiatives to gain access. And that will be a major help. And I think, again, the matchmaking kind of organizations, that definitely feels like a role that the council could be really effective in playing. If you look on council websites, you can often find incredibly large lists of different groups and organizations that all have they have many similar kind of interests and approaches to different issues and kind of thematic areas of improvement or tackling inequalities in their communities. I think that providing that forum for those organizations to meet not only helps to build collaboration, but will kind of increase this community feel within our villages, towns and cities across the country.
Great. Let me just now dip into some of the questions that our audience has. Chris, I'm going to ask the first audience question to you. We're getting lots of mixed messages now. So, for instance, local free parking is being promoted to get people back to the shops and buying, and buy as well. You know, let's really full steam ahead on consumerism. And yet, at the same time, how does that fit with things like switching to bikes and walking? What's your thoughts here in terms of what's going on?
Well, I think it is a really difficult thing to. I think we've got quite a sectoralized society, if you like. There are people, and we've seen them in the queues outside Primark, for whom shopping is an important part of their lives, and they want to do that. At the other end, we've got an awful lot of people who seem, during the lockdown, to have done a bit of personal re-evaluation and maybe thinking, well, actually, I've managed to get by without standing in queues in the shopping centre or spending my Saturday afternoon dragging my kids around, you know. So I think we need to work with the people we've got to promote the policies and to do some good leading by example. We need our local authorities to really focus on making sure the transport side in all this is critical. People are rightly worried about taking buses, trams, trains and so on. And it's not surprising that therefore they are retreating into the perceived safety of their private car. We need to really do the cycling and walking stuff, not just to make it safe or better for the existing cyclists, but really to find more ways of getting people to feel that they can do this safely. And that's not just the physical infrastructure, that may be training, support. You know, I think there's a huge range of issues that are all, maybe one of the roles for a well-organized local group is to actually tease them out and say, okay, where are the critical points here? And is the local authority's short-term transport plan really going to deliver? And at the moment, simply, you know, putting a few lines on pavements isn't really going to achieve major modal shift from cars to walking and cycling. Maybe we need more incentives. We're talking about launching an incentive scheme, pushing the government to launch an incentive scheme for e-bikes, but local authorities offering incentives for cycling is being trialled in a few places. I think we are still going to be dealing with the consumerist virus, if you like, that has taken hold of an awful lot of people's lives over the last 30 years. And I don't see any easy way of tackling that over the next 3 months, except in terms of learning from lockdown. We've lived in a really different way. Let's encourage people to remember the positive changes that they've got in the midst of all the suffering and uncertainty, and really try and build on that to say, yeah, Build Back Better means doing stuff differently. And that means you as well as me, and all of us together.
Yeah. Rakesh, I've got a question. I'll ask it of you, but it was basically for the whole panel. But do you agree that ensuring that nature and biodiversity and carbon reduction should all work closely together to deliver the aims of Build Back Better?
Yes, of course. I mean, we've all noticed what's happened in our communities over the last few months. There's fewer cars, the air's fresher. When we've been allowed to go for our daily walks, we've enjoyed how quiet and how we've noticed all of nature around us. These things are positive for the environment, but they're positive for our own well-being. And that's an important thing to remember when we're talking about these issues, that by taking this action, we are making our own lives better, healthier. So we're basically helping ourselves, and we need to bring that to the fore in this conversation too.
Yeah. Cara, if I can just ask you, there's another question here about many governments are relaxing the environmental regulations and labour laws in some ways to just make up for some of the short-term losses, economic losses that have been incurred during the pandemic and the lockdown. What are the costs or opportunities in moving towards the sustainable model of development and for building back better? Again, we've got this sort of short term, some of the reactions that national government is taking is going counter to the broader direction of travel that we all want to go in.
Yeah. And I think there's a real danger in doing that. I mean, I think, as I think others have said, that one of the lessons from the pandemic and the response is the key role of the key workers, the people that have not been paid particularly well, who have poor job protections, etc., and that we should absolutely be valuing people rather than actually jeopardizing their conditions. And we're absolutely not convinced that you do not have to have poor working conditions to bring the economy back. You look at one of the Ashen finalists, so we run an award scheme for climate solutions innovators. One of our finalists is a company called ecargobikes.com, who do what their name says, and they do deliveries for co-op and for local authorities, etc. They pay their riders the London living wage. They retain people, they have higher job satisfaction, they develop their employees, and they can have a business that works. So you don't have to redevelop in a way that just kind of slashes and burns employment conditions. You can do it in a way that actually long term is better, because there are so many additional. If you pay people badly and get them working on too long hours, multiple jobs, there are all sorts of consequences of that in terms of mental health, physical health, kids not seeing enough of their parents, all of those things, which all have their costs. So it's absolutely it's a very short-term foolish strategy.
Yeah. Jake, one question here. Do you agree that with this audience member that says systems that perpetuate social and environmental equality are the same, essentially, and therefore we cannot make progress on one without also addressing the other? Did you agree with the fact that they are so intertwined that we need to address both at the same time?
I guess the short answer is definitely yes. I think that the very system that's given rise to all of the kind of environmental and climate ills is exactly the same one that has given rise to the social inequalities and structural inequalities that are seen within our societies. And yeah, I think that the way in which we're talking about building back better is very much kind of aligned with those two are inseparable in a way. You have to, if we're thinking about creating a better world, a fairer world that's based upon principles that value sustainability and equality, then they naturally work in tandem. And improving the lives of everyone can be done at the same time as improving the quality of our environment, the protections for our environment, and creating a safe climate and world for future generations.
Great. I'd like to wrap up the Q&A by essentially just going around the panel and asking you the same question and just hearing your different perspectives. And if I may start with you, Rakesh, what is your one piece of advice about accelerating local climate action?
I think we need to encourage communities to come together. Using an example from Newcastle, we used to have something called the Newcastle Community Green Festival. It was a 2-day free event that brought together the community around the region, as well as social justice and environmental justice groups. It gave us an opportunity to plan strategies, campaigns, and look for opportunities to collaborate. We also recruited members and found volunteers. Unfortunately, we had to stop doing the event because the funding, the money that councils had dropped, and the funding that we could get dropped as well. And so getting together and finding out what everyone else is doing has become harder. So for me, the solution would have to be to find ways to get communities together, but it has to come from them rather than us going into communities and organizing for them. It's their place, and we need to respect them how to do it. And that's why I guess funding would be important to allow them the space to do what they need to do.
Great. Cara, same question to you. What would be your one piece of advice about accelerating local climate action?
I think it would have to be for community groups to work with their local authorities so that we're all pulling this in the same direction. And as Chris has said, it's both the challenge, but it's also the collaboration as well. So just to give an example of my local authority that is consulting on some pretty ambitious changes to parking regulations, charging a lot more for diesel cars, increasing residence permits, etc. They want to do a consultation with local residents, and we're saying to everyone, just go out and support these, because otherwise you're going to have NIMBYs saying, oh, we don't want these increased parking charges. So really work with your local authority. Most of them are pushing in the right direction, but community groups can do a lot to help. And we've just about to publish a new chapter of our co-benefits toolkit around the work of the role of citizen engagement, and the audience is local authorities. For local authorities, how to engage your citizens, and I think there's huge scope if we can all work together on this.
Jake, to you, what would be your one piece of advice for us about accelerating local climate action?
I think it kind of boils down to the step just before what Cara was mentioning. It's like actually getting out and talking to your communities as well, and like going and speaking to your neighbours, to the groups that are active, And if someone isn't already convening them to work collaboratively and as a bigger grouping, then you're the best person to go out and do that. And you'll be surprised to find that there's actually a huge amount of people in your neighborhoods, in districts within your cities, that are all incredibly willing and able to support that action and take on responsibilities to do the same thing. And actually coming together and building this collaborative community in which it can push for and support change at the local level and engage with your local authorities is the main thing. So I think it's just taking a lesson from the mutual aid that we've seen spring up all around the country, that when we work together, we can do fantastic things. And we kind of are actually coming from this from a very similar position, in a sense of great care for one another and the space around us. And if we channel that feeling and that energy into productive action, I think that we can see fantastic progress.
Thank you. And Chris, what would be your piece of advice for us on accelerating climate action locally?
Well, firstly, all of the above, as others have said. But I think the key thing for any climate action focus group is to start with a strong and clear vision of what you want to achieve, while being a very good listener to the needs and aspirations of other groups and communities, other groups and organizations in your communities, and finding ways to hang on to that vision while developing program and campaigns that do meet those needs and aspirations for your communities, and finding ways to campaign for your vision that involve collaboration where appropriate, and really much better communication of what we're doing. I think so many of us have been spent, maybe it's me, but quite a lot of people have spent a long time working in small groups, trying to push against or to kind of break the envelope. We're now in a position where 80% of people are really worried about climate change. Most people want a green response to this. The doors are open. We need to find ways to go out there into the wider world and engage with people. This isn't an environmental issue anymore. This is a civic issue, if you like. And I think the co-benefits of action on climate change for a green recovery are blindingly obvious to us. Probably be really clearly set out in Cara's work and in other work. Oxfam have done some great work on co-benefits. We just really need to be better communicators at this. And communication is a two-way thing. It's us listening and it's us reacting and acting on what people need. But let's bear in mind that we have to radically decarbonize in the next 10 years, or everything is going to get an awful lot worse.
And thank you. I think that's a great segue to me trying to do a quick wrap up. In that, Chris, I do agree with you and the other panelists. It feels as if we are at a watershed moment, and that we do need this kind of big thinking around Build Back Better. But crucially, we need it locally if we're going to build stronger, more resilient and inclusive communities. But importantly, listening to yourselves and what you've been sharing, this idea of thinking big locally isn't something that we have to imagine. It's something that's already happening. And it's something that we want to just create more visibility for and celebrate what's going on and encourage other people to do similar things. And so we build the momentum that's already there. But I would say that it feels like a fragile opportunity. But if not now, when we are recovering from the biggest social and economic crisis, certainly in my lifetime, and as we are facing an even bigger climate crisis, then when? So I'd like to thank my guest speakers, Cara, Rakesh, Jake, and Chris. Thank you very much for your time and for your sharing your insights with us. I'd like to thank you, our audience, for joining us, for participating and asking your questions. Carbon Copy is about inspiring and enabling local climate action by sharing the examples of others. And I hope this gives a taste for what we are trying to do and the kinds of good examples that we wish other people to hear about, copy, adapt. If you've enjoyed this event, do go to carboncopy.eco and find out what we have in store. It is the first of a series. If you're a community that's seeking support, if you have a low carbon initiative that you would like to share, do please get in contact. And I'd like to leave you with a quote by Amelia Earhart. Never interrupt someone doing what you said couldn't be done. Thank you.